go over supply and demand, at least the basics behind it. So first, let's understand demand. Demand is simply how much you demand of a specific good. So it's defined as the quantity of goods consumers are willing and able to buy at different prices. Simply is just how much you demand of something, how much you want something. If you want something really badly, then the demand is really high. If you don't really care, or if it's too expensive, then the demand is a little low. Then the law of demand, at least definitionally, states that the higher the price of a product, the less people are willing to buy it. Simply put, the more expensive a good is, the less people want it demanded. The more cheap a product is, the more demand it will have. So if let's say there's a PlayStation 5 and it's for $10, then the demand is really, really high. But then let's say it's $1,000, then demand would be really low. So that's the law of demand. And generally, there's an inverse relationship between quantity and price. So if we graph that on a grid, which a lot of economists use, and we're going to see all throughout economics, we see it's an inverse relationship between quantity and price, with quantity being on the x-axis and price being on the y-axis. It's an inverse relationship. So now let's understand supply. Supply simply is how much suppliers want to supply of a good. Definitionally, it's defined as quantity of goods producers are willing to supply at different prices. It's just simply how much they want to supply of a good. Law of supply states there's a direct positive relationship between price and quantity. So that means the more expensive a good is, the more of it's going to be produced. And the more cheap a product is, the less of it's going to be produced. You may not understand that at first, but just think about it for a second from a supplier's standpoint. Walmart, Amazon, and all these different suppliers would rather produce more of a good if it's really expensive because that means more profit to them. So they want to make more and more goods when it's more expensive. So when we graph supply, this is what we see, an upward sloping line. So remember, demand is downward sloping and supply is upward sloping, with the x-axis being quantity and the y-axis being price. Now combine that together and we get the supply and demand model that's infamously famous in economics. Supply, demand. In the middle where they intersect is called the equilibrium. That's kind of the real world situation. What happens in the real world? How much quantity is actually being produced and how expensive it is. It's where consumers and producers kind of meet a middle ground where they negotiate and make some sort of agreement as to how expensive a good is and how much of it's going to be produced. And it's going to be called the equilibrium, a dot in the middle. So now let's say that the price of a good is really, really high. Let's say it's beyond the equilibrium. For some reason, the price is up here. That can cause a surplus. Just think about it for a second. If the price of a good is sky high, 10,000, 100,000, then yeah, no one's going to be able to buy it. So it creates a surplus. Producers will have too much of it because they want to produce a lot of it, but people aren't willing to buy it. Then the opposite is true for a shortage. Let's say that a product is really, really cheap. Well, then everyone's going to be buying it, and not a lot of people are going to be supplying it. So then that causes a shortage. Boom. It's a big issue. So that's shortage and surplus. It depends on the price and the supply and demand model as a whole. Now, we can actually shift and change supply and demand based on real world events. So let's actually practice this. So, new grilling technology cuts production times in half. Well, if grilling technology cuts production times in half, that's going to impact supply. So supply shifts to the right, boom, supply. And you always want to label supply as S and demand as D, and a new graph as S1 or possibly S2. So you always want to see, are we going to be shifting supply? Are we shifting demand? Could we should be shifting both maybe, or neither? You have to understand what we're shifting in the first place. So what actually changes if we have more supply? Well, analyze the equilibriums. Over here, it's looking like a decrease in price. It's a decrease in price. But that also means more quantity is going to be produced. So overall, the more whatever we're making, quantity is increasing and the price is decreasing. Now let's do another one. The price of chicken sandwiches, a substitute, increases. So that means the demand for chicken sandwiches the demand for your product increases. Why? Because the substitutes in economics, so the chicken sandwich here, is basically your competition. If they don't want your product, they're going to go to your competitor, your chicken sandwich. But if your competitor's price increases, that means more people are going to go to you. That increases the demand for chicken sandwich. So what does that do to the equilibrium? Well, we see price increases, but also quantity increases as well. So we see that both increase. Then let's say the price of a hamburger falls from $3 to $1. Well, this is incredibly important to understand. This doesn't actually shift the curve at all. It's really important to understand that there's no event going on here at all. All we're doing is changing the price. There's no event causing the hamburger to fall the price dramatically. You're just saying it's decreasing from 3 to 1. That's just going along the curve. You're not changing the curve. So, like what we talked about earlier with the shortage, because the price decreased, we see that there's going to be a shortage. There's going to be a huge demand for a good and not enough supply produced. Then finally, let's say the price for ground beef triples. That's going to be a negative shift. Supply shifts to the left. So what happens to quantity? Well, price increases and the quantity decreases. In some cases, I have seen it occasionally in college economics courses and AP Econ, we can see a double shift, where we shift either supply, demand, or both. For these questions, either price or quantity of the equilibrium, one of them is going to be unknown. So let's say demand increased here. Well, that means either price or quantity would be unknown. It depends. You always want to graph it out. So let's do 2 different questions. Try to answer them, and I'll come back to you. Pause the video. So now that you've gone through these 2 questions, let's go through them. Number 8, the government removes a tax on pizzas, while it's also found that pizzas can help cure cancer. What is the effect on equilibrium price and quantity? Well, we can automatically notice there's 2 main events going on here. So let's understand it and break it down. The government removes a tax on pizza. So what does that do? Well, that's going to either shift supply or demand. So what did you say? Overall, that should shift supply. Supply should increase, because if you're removing a tax on pizzas, that increases supply generally. It's also found that pizza can help cure cancer. That's a bit more obvious. That's impacting demand, and demand can increase. So demand increases, supply increases. What's going to happen? Well, that's our double shift here. Both supply and demand are increasing. So we already know one of them can't be determined. So let's see. A, no change in price and quantity. That's not correct. We have 2 main events going on. That shouldn't happen. B, increased price and increased quantity. We know that's not possible. One of them is going to be, one of them we're not going to know. C, decreased price and increased quantity. No. One of them is going to be cannot determine. D, increased quantity and cannot determine price. Well, that could be right. And E, increased price and cannot determine quantity. That could be right. So let's determine that. If supply is decreasing and demand is increasing, what's going to be increasing no matter what? Well, no matter what, we're going to see an increase in price, because a decrease in supply means that there's more scarcity of a good. Let's say we have a PlayStation 5, for instance. When they first came out, there wasn't a lot of the good. So it was very expensive. A lot of scalping on Amazon. PlayStation 5 costed thousands of dollars. So lower supply increased price. And higher demand also increases price. Throughout COVID-19, there was a huge demand for toilet paper. Because of that, a lot of people in a lot of places jacked up the price of toilet paper dramatically. Both events increase price, so it has to be E. We can't determine quantity. So always determine what is actually definitively going to change. Is quantity going to change? Is price going to change? Here it's just price. Now let's go to 9. Which of the following will increase the demand for pizza as a normal good? A, an increase in the cost of producing pizza? Definitely not. A decrease in the price of pizza? That doesn't change anything, at least on our graphs. Remember, changing the price of a good doesn't change demand or supply. an increase in the price of a complementary product. A complementary product is a product served alongside of your product. So for instance, with hot dogs, you could get ketchup and mustard. For pizza, you could get, I don't know if you like ranch with pizza, but ranch you could get. Like, it's a product you sell alongside yours. So if a complementary product increases, that actually decreases the demand of your good, because then the overall product is gonna be more expensive. D, an increase in the number of restaurants selling pizza. I don't know about that. An increase in consumer income. That is generally correct. If a good is a normal good, which you'll understand hopefully if you take more economics classes, but for now it doesn't matter. An increase in consumer income means people are wealthier. So if people are wealthier, they're going to spend more on your good, and then boom, demand generally increases. So the answer here would be E. So now let's understand consumer and producer surplus. Here is our consumer and producer surplus. Always remember, consumer surplus is at the top of the graph. So if we cut this in half, consumer surplus is at the top, producer surplus is at the bottom. But what is consumer and producer surplus? Well, consumer surplus is simply how much consumers are benefiting. This is the demand line right here, D. This is the maximum price consumers are willing to pay. This line right here. And then this line is how much they actually paid. So this entire area, what you would call the area of this triangle, this is the total benefit. This is what the consumers gain from buying the specific good. This is the money they save. This is how much consumers gain. On the other hand, this is how much producers gain. This is the minimum that producers are willing to sell a good for. And this is the minimum that they actually sell it. So this is the amount of profit that they make. So this is how much benefit consumers make, and this is how much profit producers can make. And overall, this makes up consumer and producer surplus. So let's actually go through a question. Given the demand curve above, if price decreases from $8 to $4 a unit, total consumer surplus will, and pause the video and answer this question. So let's actually analyze this. We have a demand graph at least. It doesn't matter if we have supply, but because we have the price, let's say it's at $8. If it's at 8, it's here. So remember, consumer surplus is always at the top. So it's up here, this triangle. So the price goes from 8 to 4. So when it goes down to here, consumer surplus increases from this little triangle to this bigger triangle here. So it goes from 12HJ, this little area, to 12,4K. So calculate the new area. Well, we got this square here. So what is this square? 4, because this is 4, 8 minus 4, and this is 3. So 4 times 3, 12. The area of this little square here is 12. Then this triangle, 6 minus 3, 3. The height is 4. 3 times 4 is 12. But remember, triangles, the area of a triangle, 1/2 base times height. So 12, you multiply by 1/2, you get 6. So this square is 12, this square is 6. The total increase is 18. Then we have to understand government intervention. They mostly intervene to basically control these products, to incentivize or disincentivize specific goods. They do this by price ceilings and price floors. Price ceiling is simply the maximum price set by the government for a specific good. So here we have a good, supply, demand, a rental market. Then government implements a price ceiling right here. For a price ceiling to be called binding, so for it to work, it needs to be below the equilibrium. So here's the equilibrium. For it to work, it has to be here. Just imagine if a price ceiling was above the equilibrium, it wouldn't work, because the equilibrium's right here, but the maximum price is here, so that just doesn't work. It's already below it. But if it's here, then that means the price is going to decrease. But then remember what we talked about before, about surpluses and shortages? If the price is below, if the price is down here, that creates a shortage, because then people are going to keep buying, but there won't be enough supply. So remember, price ceilings causes shortages. On the other hand, we have a price floor. Price floor is the minimum price a good can be, and for it to work, it has to be above the graph. And remember, if a price is above that means we have a surplus because there's a lot of supply, but there's not a lot of demand. We've seen a lot of countries use price ceilings and price floors all the time to basically control different things. Here we see rental markets because a lot of governments use a price ceiling on the rental market because a lot of rental places are really expensive, so they keep the price stable by making a price ceiling. Or they could make a price floor if a good is way too cheap and they want to make it a bit more expensive. All of which can either create surpluses or they could create shortages. Then we have to understand deadweight loss. Deadweight loss is the lost consumer and producer surplus from a price/quantity away from the equilibrium. So here, because of the price ceiling, we actually created deadweight loss because there's more there's lost efficiency here basically. That's why a lot of people politically are really against government intervention in the economy, because price ceilings and price floors can cause inefficiency as well, even though they could benefit human beings, because like price ceiling in the rental market would make rental places cheaper. It also creates this inefficiency. If you want to calculate the deadweight loss, well, the deadweight loss is this little triangle right here, from 400 to the equilibrium to this point right here, 800. That's our deadweight loss here. So deadweight loss is simply inefficiency caused by the government or caused by several different things, but here it would be the government. So let's do this problem. Answer the problem, pause the video if you need to. Now that you've hopefully answered the question, in the diagram above, if there's a price ceiling set at P1, consumer surplus will be represented by, so if we set a price ceiling here, what's going to be a producer surplus, the consumer surplus? Well, remember, consumer surplus is always above the equilibrium, so where's the price? Well, the price would be here. It would be right here. So what's the consumer surplus? Well, it would be this P3, P1, CA. So what's going to be the answer here? Let's see. Let's go through this one by one. A, B, C. No, definitely not. P2, B, P, and I don't know. That's not right. P3, P3, B, P2. No, that's not our equilibrium. P3, A, C, P1. That's correct right here. D. So in this question, it would be D. That's our total consumer surplus. If you're curious what our deadweight loss would be, that would be A, B, C. This is because that's the lost consumer and producer surplus from making that price ceiling. So now you understand price ceilings, price floors, consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the basic idea of supply and demand. It does get a bit more complicated. You can bring in elasticity, you can bring in more government interventions, there's a lot of different stuff that deals with supply and demand. But this is the essence almost of economics. That's why it's so famous in the entire realm, because it's basically the backbone of everything in economics. So this is incredibly useful knowledge generally, and you should definitely make sure you can understand all these concepts at least.